Especially if you're like the time law. I was like, if it works for better. Biggest stuff bad. Yeah, what if it goes? That's all I want. Probably there's some things people are back. Oh, that was like, I did that back in line. Like some trophy. Wow. And then I was thinking, like I asked my roommate, I'm like, shut up. Get nicer. Oh, I used to do it. And then I stopped. My dad's like, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good from there.
Okay, lecture 32. Let's get started. So if you've missed exam 2, there are a couple emails I have. If you want to make it up this afternoon, I will be in Marshall Hall till 7 o'clock. I already have one scheduled at 2. If you haven't taken the test, you need to see me as soon as possible. Because once I hand back the test, you cannot make it up. So exam 3 is May 2nd. Exam 4 is May 12th. I think I've got the lectures associated with everything. We're going to put our break for the next exam somewhere in this lecture. We'll find a logical stopping point and switch over. So rest of the semester, we're going to try to finish endocrine this week. Moving into the liver and metabolism next week, and then trying to bring everything together in week 13. How does a horse run? What are all the systems working together? How does metabolism go through? We've alluded to it with the fast twitch and the slow twitch, and how the muscles work, how the lungs provide oxygen. How are we going to bring that all together to move a horse forward? So we're going to focus on that, and then we'll do catch up toward the end. So any questions about the nervous system? So I said we're going to do this Venn diagram to start here. So if we're looking at the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system, how are they the same? How are those two things the same and how are they different? Does anybody have any suggestion? If we do the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, how are they the same? Doubt it. If we turn it off, it'll take 5 minutes to turn it back on. I can't really do that. Yes.
They both send signals around the body.
Okay, signals is a common that's the best I can do, unfortunately. So signals are common to both. What else might be common to both? Yes. No. Sort of. What else? Both made up of neurons. What do we know about the central nervous system on its own? How is it different than the peripheral nervous system? Yeah. Any of you three? Shout it out. What do we got? Brain and spinal cord. So what do we know about the brain and spinal cord? What is their location? Axial skeleton. What else? So controls, the sides, whereas we have over here non-axial, they're outside this axial skeleton, not in the skull, not in the spinal cord. They're all the peripheral nerves. So you're going to have things going in multiple directions here. If you're thinking about the two-way, you're going to have two parallel tracks in the central nervous system where you got the afferent versus the efferent. They're going to sort of go the same tube or whatever, but signals are not going to cross back and forth. Anything else that we might add to that? So if this decides and controls, what does the peripheral nervous system do? Yes. So senses, that information comes into the central nervous system. Then the central nervous system sends out a motor response. There's no thinking, there's no integration. Information goes up, information comes down. There was another hand up. Okay. Is this helpful? We take the next one. If we break up the peripheral nervous system into the somatic and autonomic. How are those two the same? Yeah.
Is it, like, things that have to be triggered in order to happen, and the things that your body does on
Oh.
like.
We're looking at the both in the peripheral nervous system. Those are the two parts of the motor side of the nervous system. So they're both incorporated there. What's another word for motor? You can also call that the efferent side. What do we know about the motor that's different than the autonomic? Yes. So voluntary. So what do we control in that? Which type? Skeletal or voluntary muscle? Skeletal muscle is there. What's one more difference that we might bring up? What's not as obvious? There's one nerve on the pathway. If we contrast that on the other side, autonomic, involuntary, you're dealing with smooth muscle or involuntary muscle. And there's two nerves in the sequence. So two signals. So that's probably the best diagram illustrating that from your textbook for anatomy and physiology of farm animals. So somatic on the top, you've got one nerve, its body is in the central nervous system, and then the axon stretches out to wherever that skeletal muscle is. And then our two lower ones there, we have two nerves involved in that system. So if we take the autonomic and divide it into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, we're dividing that section of the nervous system up. You're still in the peripheral nervous system. What else might be common to those two areas? Yes. So always on. Yes. So involuntary, smooth muscle. How is the sympathetic different? So pumps you up. So fight, flight, gets you ready. Parasympathetic. Rest and digest brings you down. What are these? Some other differences between the two? So where they are, so sympathetic is where? Right, thoracic and lumbar for this, or is it backwards? Nope, thoracic and lumbar. versus cervical and sacral. So they come out at different spots in the spinal cord. What else? Yes.
One of them, medical substitute.
So transmitters, sympathetic, adrenaline or norepinephrine, and a couple others. So different transmitters. What else? Sympathetic is 2 neurons, but it's short then long. A short one goes to those ganglion that are on either side of the spinal cord. The parasympathetic is long, then short. So the second one, the ganglion is right next to the organ that it's dealing with. So, any questions on any of that? Is that helpful? Breaking things down? Want the Venn diagrams on the exam? How many say no? How many say yes? Okay, no's have it. So the other one we can do with here, we ended with briefly. Protein versus steroid hormones. What are the differences between those? Skipping over to the endocrine system. How are they the same? They're all hormones, so that means they have a defined source. They move through the blood. And then they have a target or receptor somewhere in the body. So what do we know about protein hormone? Relatively speaking, they're large. They're hydrophilic. So what does that mean they can do? They can combine with water, so they move easily through the blood. Can they move through the cell membrane? No, they can't get through. So their actions are outside. So receptor is on the plasma membrane. And then how long do they act? Minutes to hours as a rule. Steroids, relatively speaking, small compared to a protein hormone, much smaller. They're going to be hydrophobic. What does that allow them to do? They don't like water, so they need to be carried in transmitters or transporters in the blood. But when we get to the cell, what do? They pass right through that plasma membrane because they don't have a problem with that hydrophobic barrier. So the receptor is inside the cell, somewhere, usually in the nucleus. And we're talking about days to years for the responses they elicit. So more long-term versus short-term. Any questions on any of that? So the endocrine system, we've talked about hormones, different types. Where do they come from? What do they do? So these are the different endocrine organs that we're going to deal with. I'm going to leave the reproductive, the gonads, to whatever breeding class you have. I'm going to focus on the other ones in here. We've got the hypothalamus, sort of connected. We got the pituitary, the adrenals, the thyroid, the parathyroid. We're not going to talk much about the thymus, and we'll deal with the pancreas. So looking at each of those, change the picture compared to what your handout had. So hypothalamus, located at the base of the brain, kind of that middle section in the center. It's going to help us respond to any number of things, and this is the connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So you've got the hypothalamus has direct connections to the pituitary gland, which sits right underneath it. So you've got this little hanging dewflocker there that's hanging from the base of the brain. You have two different parts. Your adrenohypophysis, commonly called the anterior pituitary, and your neurohypophysis, the posterior pituitary. So anterior versus posterior. What does anterior mean in this case? Closer to the nose side of things, versus the back of the head, the rear of the skull for the posterior. We got the adrenals. I think we found them with our foal. They're just on the anterior end of each of the kidneys. So there's two of them, the cranial end, the anterior end. The thyroid and parathyroid are right in your neck, right around the trachea. And then you have the pancreas that is caudal to the liver. It sits kind of wrapped around the duodenum, the first part of the small intestines. So let's start with the pituitary gland, because more often than not, the pituitary is where everything starts. We could call this the master endocrine gland. You've got a connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So let's take a look at some of those diagrams. So breaking that diagram apart, you've got the hypothalamus up top. Those green things are what? Anybody want to guess? Neurons. So you have a neural connection between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So the green things here are neurons. We have a capillary bed where we empty the various transmitting or releasing hormone things, and they're going to work their way down into the capillary bed in the anterior pituitary. So you have two capillary beds that are going in order. So this tends to be a blood-centered system. So nerve endings here. You've got a capillary bed here. Blood coming in both ways, and then we're draining out. So we go up here, come back down. We leave the anterior pituitary with the hormones in the blood that has been generated there. So the hypothalamus is going to secrete a number of different hormones. So looking at that list, what do you see reoccurring? Releasing hormone. So the hypothalamus is going to lead to the release of troponin, the release of corticotropin, the release of gonadotropin, and somatotropin. So we abbreviate these with the first letters TRH, CRH, GRH, or it could be sometimes GnRH. And then somatotropin releasing hormone. Our old one is growth hormone releasing hormone out there. So that's going to come from the hypothalamus. Then we have, so these hormones here, their target is right here. So we're only going fraction of an inch before they reach their target. And this is also a case where you don't have to go all the way back to the heart and the lungs and the heart to get to your target. You've got capillary beds in sequence. So we do the releasing factors or the releasing hormones up here. They go down to their targets here and release. The first four there match up with the releasing hormones up here. So thyrotropin, adrenocorticotropin, gonadotropins, FSH and LH, and somatotropin, also called growth hormone. So these are going to be released down here and moved out into the body to find their targets in distant organs. So initial releasing factors start a cascade to get those hormones up and running. If we look at the posterior pituitary, we've got a more nervous approach to things, a nerve center approach. We have the nerve bodies up in the hypothalamus. The axons run all the way down into the posterior pituitary. And then we have the hormones that are going to be released directly from these nerves. So we're talking about oxytocin and vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone are going to be released directly into a capillary bed from a signal starting up here in the hypothalamus. Instead of neurotransmitters, we're releasing hormones at the end of that axon. So we're looking at oxytocin as a hormone and vasopressin, which is also called ADH or antidiuretic hormone. So they're produced up here in the cell bodies, shipped down in vesicles, and then when we need to release them, they come out of the axons and dump directly into a capillary bed. Any questions on the anterior pituitary and the organization and structure of it? Any questions on the posterior? So oxytocin, ADH, vasopressin, synthesized in the hypothalamus, moved down the nerve tracts, released into that capillary bed in the posterior pituitary. So oxytocin is going to lead to uterine contractions. Going to lead to prostaglandin release. That's going to get things rolling again. That's going to break down the CL for the next thing there, or next cycle. You've got the promotion of lactation, and with our mammals, we have the milk ejection reflex. So an animal, a baby starts suckling, signal gets sent to the hypothalamus that there's a baby down there. Oxytocin is released, goes to the heart, to the lung, to the heart, and out to the mammary gland. And then it squeezes the secretory tissue and moves the milk down into the teat. And then that milk is consumed by the baby. Antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin reduces urine volume. How do we say that happens? Anybody remember? Opening the collecting tubule and the nephron, allowing water to move back to the blood. So it's going to reduce urine volume to conserve water. It's also going to constrict volume or blood vessel volume to help increase blood pressure to keep everything moving around the body. So Ren's dilemma. My mom married a guy named Ren. Ren, long story short, does not have a functional pituitary. So given what you've seen there, what is Ren going to lose if he doesn't have a functioning pituitary? Specifically, his main problem is the anterior pituitary. You think that just looking at some of those names that we introduced to you, that might be a problem? So he's got a very strong relationship with his endocrinologist. He's on hormone replacement on a daily basis. Cortisol, if he misses 12 hours, he's in trouble. So it's cortisol pill in the morning, cortisol pill at night. He needs to adjust that cortisol depending on how much effort or stress his body is under. But it's interesting the arguments he has with the pharmacist, like, well, we're not going to be open. I can't wait till Monday. So if we're going to think about the pituitary, what does Ren lose? Typically the anterior pituitary. Adrenal corticotropic hormone, he's going to lose that. If this doesn't work anymore, he can't secrete that. So we lose that. If he's doesn't have the GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, he's going to lose FSH and LH. Have any of you had your breeding classes yet? Few of us, okay? So we're going to lose that. We're going to lose human somatotropin, and we're going to lose THS, thyroid stimulating hormone. So we'll go through these one at a time, but you can think about this in the background. He's got to make sure he replaces all the end products of this cascade that starts in the hypothalamus, goes to the anterior pituitary, and then to the targets in the body. So if we start with human somatotropin growth hormone, it's going to build us up. It's going to increase muscle mass. It's going to kind of get us in an anabolic position. So without that, what happens? He's not going to grow anymore. He's almost 80. But he's going to lose muscle mass at an alarming rate. So there's a certain amount of workouts that have to be done, and we need a certain amount of replacement of that hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to adjust our basal metabolic rate. In the wintertime, we have more of that, so we increase our basal metabolic rate so we can stay warm. If he loses that, he's cold all the time until we get everything titrated. He doesn't have the warmth that we used to have. He also doesn't have the energy he used to have. Pumping things up, getting things going. It's just not there without the hormone replacement. The ACTH going to the adrenal glands, helping him cope with stress. This is the one he needs every 12 hours or he's in trouble. So without that cortisol, his body does not respond to stress well. It starts to rip itself apart. Bad things happen. And then if we get into GnRH, gonadotropic releasing hormone, we do FSH. Anybody know what FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, does? Yeah. Produce sperm in the male. Probably not a big concern at his age. LH, what does that do for the male? Luteinizing hormone. It releases the follicle and turns the follicle into the CL. Luteinizing hormone, what does that do for the male? Anybody know? Testosterone. LH is going to lead to the production of testosterone. So there are certain complaints from my mom that I really don't want to hear about. Things are not working the way they should. Don't need to know that, Mom. So in order for him to function, he's got to replace all of these hormones on some level. So there's a testosterone patch, there's twice-a-day cortisol, and then there's injections associated with some of the other stuff in his life. So this was related to a car accident. They didn't know what was happening. He was going downhill quick. When they figured out what was happening in his anterior pituitary, they were able to save him, but it took a while to figure out what was going on. So looking at the various plans, so the adrenal glands, I think we pulled one of these out during our dissection. You have two distinct tissue types in the adrenals. You have the medulla in the center and then the cortex on the outside. Each of those responds differently or has different hormones associated with those two areas. We can think about the adrenal as another connection between the nervous system, which acts very quickly, but effects tend to be short term. And then we have a hormonal response that's going to take over and keep us in that sympathetic state if we need to be. So epinephrine, norepinephrine are produced by the adrenal medulla. See, these are going to assist or augment that sympathetic response of the body to some sort of stress. We have the nervous impulses going out first, and then we follow that up with the hormones that go through the body and produce the effects that we associate with fight or flight. So anybody ever been in a situation like a near car accident, and you're sitting there after the fact, and all of a sudden you get that wave coming over you? That's those hormones kicking in. So you have the nervous response immediately, and then the hormones are coming in to help augment that, to help sustain that long-term response. So stimulated by sympathetic neurons. So you've kicked off that sympathetic response really strong. It's going to hit that adrenal medulla, the center of the adrenal gland, and help augment that response. So releasing those different stress hormones, epinephrine, adrenaline, norepinephrine, are going to tell the body to pump it up, get ready to run, to get ready to fight. The cortex has a very different role. The adrenal cortex, we talk about mineralocorticoids that are going to basically manage our electrolytes, and then glucocorticoids, which are going to help manage the energy in the body. So mineralocorticoids, we talked about aldosterone in our kidney lecture, managing our electrolytes in the distal convoluted tubule. So that's going to help move things around, help with sodium retention, potassium excretion at the kidney. So we're managing those electrolytes with aldosterone. Cortisol is going to try to pump up the energy kind of in support of that stress response or anything that we're dealing with. So we need more blood glucose. We need more amino acids. We need more fat to have for energy to do the things that we need to do. So cortisol is going to increase blood glucose and just general energy in general, with fats and proteins being moved over to energy sources. So both the medulla and the cortex are making steroid hormone. So they're taking cholesterol from the liver and they're modifying them to generate aldosterone, to generate cortisol, to help do the things that those two hormones need to do. So corticoids released from the adrenal cortex. The signal from the brain is ACTH. So we go TRH, cortical releasing hormone. That's going to go to the anterior pituitary, release ACTH. ACTH goes to the cortex of the adrenals and starts the management of stress. And particular, it's going to help bring up our blood glucose, get that released from the liver, moved around the body to allow different tissues to respond to different stresses with an increased available energy. So there's a lot of different cortisones, cortisol, cortisone, corticosterone, all in that same class. We won't really make a distinction here. Just know that we've got those cortisols, cortisones coming out of your cortex. So mineralocorticoids, aldosterone is the big one we're thinking of. Again, produced in the cortex. We showed you that big, complicated diagram there. And just remember, aldosterone is involved in electrolyte management of at the kidneys. So conserving sodium, eliminating potassium. So depending on what our needs are, where our blood pressure is, we may make some adjustments there by secreting aldosterone. Moving over to the thyroid gland. You have thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. So thyroxine and triiodothyronine are the two things there. Thyroid hormone, and then you've got thyroxine, T4. It's got four. The 3 and the 4 is the number of iodines in the molecule. They're going to be in the pink area here around the trachea. You've got calcitonin released from the parafollicular cells around that. So you got different cell types releasing different hormones. So thyroid hormone, thyroxine, 4 iodines, long-lasting hormone that's going to elevate our basal metabolic rate. It's going to pump us up. It's going to keep us warmer in the winter by loosening things up. This is a non-stable or not as stable, the triiodothyronine. It's only got 3 iodines in there. It's not going to last as long. It's going to be consumed and recycled fairly quickly. So both of them, they're going to increase our metabolic rate. So we're burning more energy. We're trying to stay warm. We've got more heat generated in the winter so we can handle the outside temperatures. We've got increased oxygen consumption, burning those different substrates. And with that, we should have increased ATP generation. And we have receptors for these two hormones, the thyroid hormones, particularly thyroxine, are found throughout the body. So if we're looking at our thyroxine here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Triiodothyronine, thymine, 1, 2, 3 iodines. So we've got the T cells are follicular, calcitonin. It's going to respond to high blood calcium. Its job is to bring that blood calcium down. We've got osteoblasts, and we could probably throw in here osteocytes are going to put calcium back into the bones, store it to bring that blood calcium down. So making new bone on some level. Parathyroids right there in the same place. The yellow dots here. So around the trachea, their job, as we talked about earlier in the semester, is to bring up that blood calcium. So taking stuff out of the bones and putting it back into the blood to increase that blood calcium. So inhibiting the osteoblast from blood formation. You're going to work with the small intestine and the kidney to make sure that calcium comes in and stays in. So not letting it go with the kidney through the bladder, bringing it in through the intestine. You're also going to probably throw in the osteocyte in there, making withdrawals from the bone to increase the calcium levels in the blood. So number of different directions, the intestine, the kidneys, the bone, all going to increase that blood calcium. The pancreas. The pancreas has endocrine and exocrine functions. So exocrine are things that get secreted into the intestines. Endocrine, we have two hormones that are going to be secreted into the blood. So if this is the first part of the small intestines, the duodenum, that pancreas sits right in there near that fold in the duodenum. So you're going to have some ducts that come down that are going to join. We've got that common drainage. We got the exocrine function here, secreting enzymes that are going to help digestion, secreting buffer to help manage the acid load we just got from the stomach. So you got both functions there. So hormones going into the blood, and then the duct system dumping stuff into the small intestine. So I move this slide up from farther back in the handout, kind of going over that exocrine and endocrine function. It should be toward the back. So we're thinking of the pancreas has both. There are a lot of different organs or different things that secrete either into the blood or into the lumen in some way. So endocrine, we're not dealing with ducts. We're doing right into the bloodstream. We're surrounded by capillary beds. Those are going to act as the duct. So internal release directly into the bloodstream. We're having hormones being released and having effects around the body. So these hormones are going to be involved in a lot of different processes, some short-term, others long-term, growth, maturity, reproduction. The exocrine glands have ducts in them. Ducts, opposed to quacking. So they're going to release sometimes externally. You've got sweat glands, our exocrine, saliva, tears, mucus, and our mammary glands are all exocrine glands. They're going to excrete into the outside world. We also have some that are internal. Stomach acid being put into that stomach. We have bile generated in the liver, held in the gallbladder, being pushed out to help with fat digestion. The pancreatic juices, as we alluded to here. And then you've got some secretions associated with the uterus. And I would imagine the male reproductive tract has got some exocrine functions as well, not listed here. So going back to that glucagon. So glucagon, we have pancreas, we think about controlling blood sugar. So just like our cortisol bringing up or glucotropic hormones bringing stuff up, we're going to have glucagon that's going to increase blood glucose. So anytime that the pancreas suggests that we've got low blood glucose, it's going to release glucagon. Glucagon is going to do two different things. It's going to break down glycogen, which we haven't talked about. That'll be next week. Glycogen in the liver to release glucose into the blood. That's going to help bring things up. It's also going to stimulate the liver to make new glucose, taking substrates, putting them together, generating new glucose. So in both cases, releasing stuff that we have stored for later or making new gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis, we're going to raise blood glucose. Insulin's going to have the opposite effect. Insulin is meant to put glucose away, to reduce blood sugar. So it's also going to have effects on amino acids, on lipids, and all that stuff. We can think about insulin as putting things away. Glucagon is bringing glucose out. And we'll start there next time. Marshall Hall, I'm in 107. So right across from Professor Hayes's office.